I'm Gary, and this is Coasting with Culture, which is all about combining theme park visits and riding roller coasters with various cultural experiences around the world. After a week and a half exploring various cities and theme parks of Italy, this adventure continues to the other side of the Mediterranean and into Africa for a first-time visit to Tunisia. While there will be a chance to explore some great historic sites, the first couple of days were spent trying to ride as many coasters in the country as possible. When talking about the overall plans for Rick and Keith's trip, Rick mentioned his desire to add more destinations that might not be as commonly traveled, such as when the two of them spent time in Azerbaijan the year before. I have to admit, Tunisia wasn't anywhere near the top of my list of countries to visit, and at first I figured I would just join them for the Italy portion of their trip. But the idea of going to a new country was enticing, and the more I read about Tunisia, the more I became interested in going. What ultimately sealed the deal, though, was a great option for getting back home afterward, as I found for the price of a round-trip economy ticket, I could fly business class or first class, going from Tunis up to Frankfurt with Lufthansa, then Frankfurt to Chicago, and Chicago back home to Seattle with United. After hearing a lot of good things about United's Polaris business class experience from Rick, who flies with them frequently, I was definitely intrigued by the pricing, and that ultimately inspired looking into the flight with Condor for getting to Europe with my Alaska points. So that's ultimately what I did. There was a bit of a catch with this deal, however, as my departure back to the States would be the day after Rick and Keith's, so I'd have a day alone in Tunisia before heading home. This turned out to be a good thing though, as the 2 days we'd have together were going to be tied up with going to try and ride as many of the coasters in the country as we could, so having that extra day would offer the chance to explore the area for a bit of Tunisian culture. As our Italian adventure concluded, we'd make our way to Tunis on board the country's flag carrier, ITA Airways. I didn't really go into this flight with any expectations, and that was probably a good thing, because what they ended up offering was very minimal legroom, absolutely no air conditioning while we sat and waited, and an ample amount of children crying as loud as they physically could. To be fair though, the crying kids aren't really the fault of the airlines, nor is it an unusual experience, but letting the plane feel like a furnace probably didn't help the kids calm down, so yeah. Luckily though, we would get underway, and it wasn't long before we were departing from Europe and heading across the Mediterranean Sea. Less than an hour later, we could see the North African coast as we approached Tunis. Once we had the rental car picked up, it was time to get right into the coaster hunt. There were a few times where it seemed like traffic lanes were optional, but the drive offered some fascinating dynamics, whether it was the parts of Tunis that looked like other major cities of the world, or residential areas with buildings that seemed to be doing the best they can to withstand the higher temperatures and harsh conditions faced from being in such close proximity to the Sahara Desert. The more arid landscape also provided some fascinating views along the way. Our planned first stop brought us to Carthage Land, a shopping and entertainment complex located in Hammamet, which featured a few rides, including what might be the most unique coaster in the country, King Kong. The only problem though is that we found out the ride doesn't open until later in the evening, so we decided to continue on to the next stop and come back later after grabbing some snacks and drinks from one of the shops. Not knowing for certain the operating hours of these venues was a bit of a theme for our Tunisian coaster hunt, as there weren't always websites available to find that information, and some of the information that came up on Google Maps wasn't exactly reliable. And as we arrived to our next stop, called Springland, located in the city of Monastir, we found the gates open, but once again we're too early. Luckily though, it would only be about an hour until opening, so we just hang around for a while. It was a bit bizarre walking around this empty amusement park and no one thinking anything of it, and there came a point where a nearby minaret began to make the call to afternoon prayer, which was a first for me while inside an amusement park. As 4 o'clock came, they finally opened up and we got our tickets for a ride on what would be our second wild wind of the trip, and to be frank, this was the roughest. It proved to be a decent bit more painful than the one we rode back in Milan, so not exactly a great case for the model being of high quality. But it was our first Tunisian coaster, making this the 31st different country I've ridden one in. We also asked about riding their small fruitworm coaster called Warm Coast. However, they only allowed children to ride it, so we'd miss out on that one. After about a 30-minute drive, we came into the town of Sousse for Menage Aladdin, a smaller park that seemed to encircle their one coaster Pepito Gonzalez, which was a custom L&T Systems coaster that surrounded a sort of island of benches and tables in the middle, and the double down on the first drop was rather unusual for a coaster this size. The lap bars were fairly tight, which meant I couldn't get mine down all the way, but the ride-out basically told me, it's fine, so I rode without it, which might have made the ride even more interesting. A short drive later from the center of Sousse to the outskirts of town brought us to Hannibal Park, which might have been one of the nicest parks in the country in terms of upkeep and maintenance. And here there were 2 coasters for us, starting with yet another Wild Wind coaster called Grand Huet, which somehow might have been the best of the 3 Wild Winds for the trip. The other would be another Wacky Worm style coaster called Mini 8, which at this point I'm fairly convinced that almost every country with multiple roller coasters has at least one of these in their collection. We then took a short drive up the coast for Keith to make a special stop so they could add to his collection of Hard Rock Cafe memorabilia at Tunisia's one location, found in Port El Kantoui. Inside, it felt like one of the smallest locations I've been to, but one thing they did offer was a great outdoor setting for concerts. To wrap up our first day of Tunisian coaster hunting, we drove back to Hammamet, which led to seeing some interesting items for sale by roadside vendors at the highway toll booth. And as the sun went down, the evening brought the people out, as the venue was significantly busier, likely because of the cooler temperatures. Here they have one of the most bizarrely operated rides around, allowing folks to enter the line up to 10 minutes before the hour, then cutting it off at the hour and running the ride enough times to cycle everyone through. So you really have to watch the time for it. Have you ever visited any parks that had really strange or inconvenient operations that made riding it a bit more challenging? Share your experiences with such operations in the comment section below. As you wait to ride, you see a series of clips from various King Kong movies over the years, and then when the time comes, you head up to the station, which is very heavily themed. And after you run through the course that has you flying around the giant ape, you have a post-ride show that involves projections of demons and spirits, which then fall to the roar of the mighty Kong. One of the most bizarre coasters I've ridden yet, but it easily was the best in the country, and it was a fun way to end our first day in Tunisia, as we returned to Tunis for a much-needed night's sleep. The second day of the coaster hunting in Tunisia would bring us to the west of Tunis, as there are 2 locations which we had reason to believe would be open earlier than the parks we had visited the day before, one of which was found in the city of Ariana at the Africa Mall. A first glance inside didn't seem super promising, as the mall had quite a few closed shops, and half of the escalators didn't even operate. It didn't seem all that different than some of the malls back in the United States that have been struggling to stay open. In spite of all these warning signs that we might be walking into another closed park situation, we did find the indoor Hannibal Park, which offered an L&T Systems mini coaster Pepito with a simple figure 8 course. As we moved on to the next park, we found ourselves in a rather nice coastal town called Bizerte, and within a block of the beach was our next stop, Park Aladin Bizerte. One thing I certainly appreciate about this park was that it benefited from the sea breeze to keep the temperatures cooler, and it also offered shade over many of their rides, including Turbo, their Shanghai Rides snail coaster, which felt similar to one of the coasters we rode in the greater Rome area. The operator even gave us a little bit of a boost, which helped to make the spinning pretty wild. With that stop complete, the rest of our coaster stops would be within the greater Tunis area. Soukra Park wasn't open yet, but like Springland the day before, the gates were open, and they didn't seem to be too worried about us hanging around until they started running the rides. Nor did they seem to mind adorable animal visitors hanging out either. Eventually, they began testing, and we were able to enjoy another SBF Visa creation in Takeoff, which had to have one of the jankiest tracks I've ridden, as it had a sort of trick track that would throw you to the side pretty well. It was a short drive to the park Katkout, where we'd get our last of the Wacky Worm style coasters for this trip, known as Pame, and also happened to be an SBF Visa version of the popular coaster model. Finally, to wrap up our coaster riding, we went to what might have been the largest park in Tunisia, Happy Land Dahdah, which was home to a Cavassa Diego Nessi coaster called Speedy, featuring a layout that was the same as Dino Roller at Flamingo Land from the year before. Walking around the park, we found the spot that we assumed was the site of the former Galaxy coaster of the past, which is a bummer to see it gone, but that's how it goes sometimes. And on our way out, I grabbed an apple-flavored soda called Apla, which was quite tasty and refreshing on a very warm Tunisian evening. At that point, we went ahead and dropped off our rental car and went back to the hotel so that Rick and Keith could grab a shower before they'd begin their journey home, leaving me on my own for one last day. While Tunisia's coaster collection may not be the most impressive out there, they do offer some fun rides, including one that really stands out from the others. And getting to these various parks will offer the opportunity to see the diverse landscape in many towns of the North African nation. And while this might have been the end for Rick and Keith, I'd have one more day to explore some historic and scenic locations, making this truly a coasting with culture experience. Thank you for watching this video from Coasting with Culture. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button to see future videos here on YouTube, like these ones which you may enjoy as well. Additional content can be found at coastingwithculture.com, and you can also follow Coasting with Culture on various social media channels at CoastWCulture for announcements, previews, and updates. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care and safe travels.